Hey guys, it's Ann. Welcome to my home worm farming channel, and today, as you can see, we are going to take a look in on blue. I am going to try and get a good harvest out of this end because seed starting is coming, and then I do have a decent feeding for them to go at this end. And first of all, one of the things that I did want to say, while I've got you here while you're paying attention, is that I really do appreciate everybody that goes into the links and gets things from my channel. Believe it or not, I get about 4% or 3% depending on what kind of thing it is you buy. Doesn't cost you anything else. You can double check. And then in addition to that, if you were to buy anything during the same time as you buy the screen or the coconut coir or whatever, I get 3% of that as well, which has allowed me this year to buy a GoPro 13 with a media mod with a nice microphone system. So I appreciate everybody that has done that, and I always kick the money back to the channel. It's not like I'm going out and buying vacations. This channel doesn't really make a whole bunch of money. But I did want to tell you thank you for everybody who does participate in that. I know I don't generally go very hard in saying buy this, but those of you that do, I appreciate it. Second of all, this particular video is going to be not so much about myth busting, but explaining the myths that we do have that are kind of long-standing about worm farming. You know, one of which is acid, one of which is salt, and one of which is poison. What is poisonous to worms? What is too salty? And what is too acid? And that's kind of what we're going to be talking about during the worm talk while I'm going through taking care of blue. And for any of my fellow short people in the house, I did make this little ledge for me so that I can be a little taller and have it be a little bit more ergonomic for me. Shadow approves. And as of right now, I don't know where the grand cat is. I'm sure she'll show up later. All right, so let me put you down, and we're going to do a little bit of harvesting over at that end so that I can get my alliums started in the next month or so. All right, so I'm just going to take out stuff that is already dry here. I'm not going to force it. So anyway, starting at the top with things that are acidic. Now, a lot of people will tell you that tomatoes are too acidic and peppers are too acidic and that certain foods break down. That's plastic, that doesn't belong there. Certain things break down and become too acidic, etc. And what I'm just asking for here is a little bit of a thought experiment where we think about what do we mean by that, and you know, what does that mean for the worms? So first of all, not all worms are the same, and we have worms that here in the United States, if you're not here in the United States, you can shout out what the pH of your natural soil is, but here where I live, the pH is about 8. Because there is a lot of limestone, because millions of years ago, this used to be a shallow ocean where I live. Then you've got people that live out on the East Coast that their soil can be in the range of 5 to 6, which many people, at least people that live around where I do, would consider to be pretty acidic. But that's where they grow the blueberries that we all love. And quite honestly, they have worms just fine. So then where does that take us to for what is too acidic for the worms? And looking into the books that I have read, many of them are by Clive Edwards. He, you know, believe it or not, there are textbooks and college classes about worms, and he probably has written most of them. And in his findings, in his life and in his research with the people that he did research with, worms actually can go to a pH down to about 4 for the type of worms that he did the research on. So then we're looking at, okay, so 4 is kind of what we have verified research of what worms can do. So what is a pH of 4? So then we're looking at tomatoes, and we're looking at most things, I mean, except for Coca-Cola or soda, which has phosphoric acid in it, most food isn't going to be much more acidic. You know, maybe when you're looking at lemon juice and the like. But that brings me to my next point about acidity and worms. You don't generally see worms eating things that are fresh. On occasion, I have seen worms go at it on fresh watermelon or fresh pumpkin, but other than that, believe it or not, worms, I'm sure you've noticed, they don't actually just eat regular food right when you chop it up and give it to them. So in the amount of time that it takes them to get involved with the food, other processes are acting on it and kind of mitigating that whole pH, as well as other things, to be fair. So when you're looking at what you feed your worms, you're not really expecting them to eat the things exactly as you give it to them 30 minutes later. You would expect that things have to soften up a little bit. You would expect that the worms have to wait for the bacteria and fungus to get into things before the worms get to eat it. So that's where some of your acidity is lost, so to speak. Now, there are certain things that worms are perfectly capable of getting into. You figure here where my soil is 8, sometimes more, there's worms running amok all over the place with no problem at all with a pH of 8. Okay, I think I'm getting into the too wet department here. I was hoping to get a little bit more. So then we'll talk about things that worms naturally go after, even when us humans are not involved. Now around here where I see worms that live here, and to be fair, here in North America where I live is a glaciated area, and there are no existing original worm species here. All the worms that live here now, whether it be red wigglers, European nightcrawlers, blue worms, I haven't seen any Alabama jumpers, but they tell me they're coming. All of those worms came from Europe. They did not originally come from here. So you can kind of extrapolate this to the soil in and around Europe. Can't tell you anything about Australia, but I do know that the same families of worms that live in Australia are the kinds they find in Africa. Like on the west coast of Africa is where the African nightcrawlers are from, and the soil pH over there is below 6. So when we're looking at all the kinds of worms that we can buy commercially to do this kind of a job, most of them are very comfortable with doing a pH between definitely 5 and definitely 8, naturally, just running amok in the soil that they have in our yards. So, what have you been told that you should leave out of your worm bins because of acidity? Let me know in the comments below, what have you been told? So, in addition to you guys telling me what you've heard as far as what you should not feed your worms because of the pH, also let me know, is there anything that I could do for an experiment for you that would make you feel better about feeding more things to your worms? My mission in life is not to grow more worms to sell. It is to make sure, less things go into the landfill. That's my goal. So if I can help you put more things in the worm bin and less things in the landfill, I would love to help you with that. So if you have things that you're concerned about that maybe you're not doing because you don't want to hurt your worms, then by all means put that in the comments below. If you would like me to do a small research project to help you out, to make you feel more comfortable with adding more things to your worm bin. Okay, it is actually getting quite cold. I need to get a thermometer down here. We finally got more snow. It didn't last because the ground is so warm here, but it did snow pretty good here for a while. And my basement down here is, although it is climate controlled, it is still pretty cool down here, which the red wigglers are pretty happy with any way you look at it. Now, the kind of worms that are in this particular bin in blue are red wigglers, European nightcrawlers, and blue worms. So they, except for the blue worms, they're all very happy down to almost freezing. All right, let's flip you around and look at the business end of the bin. All right, so the second topic that gets brought up a lot in the questions and comments is about salt. And just from not just a culinary standpoint, but from kind of a science standpoint, let's talk about what salt is and what it isn't. Many people who think about salt think about the stuff you put on your food, and that's in the form of sodium chloride, or if you use sea salt, there might be some magnesium in there, and maybe some extra other micronutrients that are in ocean salt. So one of the things about it is that it is primarily dangerous to pretty much everybody because of what it does to your cells. And so if you remember back to, I don't know, grade school or high school science class, and low on the other. And in general, that's just called osmosis, as you're related to cells in animals and plants. I actually don't know if it applies to fungi. So when you get too much salt on a worm that is almost entirely made out of water, the problem is that salt sucks the water right out of the worm, because it's a cell, and the cell can basically move the water, but it can't move the salt. And just because of science, all that water is going to come out of the worm and kill it. So when we're looking at problems in worm bins with salt, let me move you down. How much salt is going to be too much for a worm? Because as you may know, if you go to the hospital and they give you an IV because you're dehydrated, they're giving you a solution that is not only, water, but it is also sugar and salt. So when you're looking at how much is bad for the worms, that's something that I'm not completely sure about. How much salt in food would you be able to add that would hurt your worms? So now you've seen how big blue is here. This may be different amount for different bins that are smaller. But when you're talking about adding maybe some soup vegetables or some pasta that may have been cooked in salt water, and you're thinking, is that too much salt? Is that all potworms? Holy cow, look at all those potworms. When you're looking at, adding food that has been salted, how much should you be worried about? And I did try to find some research on how much is too much. And the only research that I could find that gave me concrete numbers was in regards to keeping an entire bin at a particular salinity. And that was at 2 to 3%, which is not logical. If you were to feed a potato that had been cooked in salt, that potato is just going to be here. And basically the rest of your bin is not going to have extra salt. But then you say, and after it degrades, then that's going to move throughout the rest of the bin, which will then also dilute it. And then when you harvest your castings, then it goes out. To which you say, and salt is also not good for plants. Well, also not exactly true. A lot of the things that we use for different kinds of fertilizer, whether they're natural or man-made, do have a kind of salt in them. When you're looking at the different kinds of salt, you can have an ammonium salt, you can have anything that basically has a metal ion attached to it can be a salt. So we're most used to our sodium salts, but when you're looking at fertilizers, you also are seeing things like sulfur and magnesium and ammonia and nitrate, and all those things are technically salts. And the plants and the animals do just fine up to a point. So different concentrations of things can hurt plants or animals, but it is a lot more than what us humans are cooking in our food. That being said, and I know I probably have lost a bunch of you at this point, but that being said, anytime that I am giving things that have been salted, like let's say there's leftover pasta, I'm actually going to take that and soak it in water to remove not only the salt, but the oil and anything that might not play nice in the worm bin. And it might not be that the worms can't eat it, but it might also cause an uptick of bugs. It might attract bugs that I don't want. In general, I do try to rinse off food if it's not fresh, vegetables and such. I do try to rinse that off before I put it in, just to mitigate any problems. So I'm trying to tell you there are more things you can put in your bin if you just pay a little bit closer attention to rinsing things off, and then maybe don't be quite as worried about things like soup vegetables and the like. I would even go as far to say that I would put French fries in here if I rinse them off thoroughly with water. All right, getting down to the very, very business end here for the last topic, and that is poison. I have heard a lot of people use the word "that's poisonous to worms" so many times. And again, I just want you to think about the word poison. What does that mean? So when we're talking about poisonous, what do we mean by poisonous? And, you know, there's a technical term that I'm sure doctors and people in the medical field can tell you what that means. I know that working in the food industry, you know, there are different kinds of natural poisons that we worry about, like botulism and those type of things that they talk about. I think it's called the L50 or LD50, somebody correct me. Basically what it's saying is, if your body weight is known, how much of the thing does it take to kill you? And, you know, that's what they go on as far as being poisonous. So when we're talking about worms, obviously they're very tiny, but one of the things we need to remember is they're not humans. And that is, you know, I think people are like, oh, duh, and they're not humans. But, however, ooh, avocado completely demolished. Springtails for the win. But honestly, there are a lot of people who think that worms have sensitivities, maybe not poisons, but have sensitivities to the same things that us humans do. And that's what I want to talk about today, is things that worms are not sensitive to that perhaps us humans are a little bit. If you've been here for a long time, you know I'm a bit of a pepperhead. I do like my spicy peppers. And although some people would say that they are poisonous, you know, technically I think the plant is growing all that capsaicin to prevent us mammals from eating them. But honestly, birds eat them just fine. In fact, they enjoy them a lot. So much so that they've named many peppers bird peppers. Because they are, it's not because they look like peppers or look like birds, it's because the peppers prefer them for their food. And so not all animals have that same problem. So a lot of worm chow, a lot of pot worms, in case you're wondering. So that's one of the things I wanted to say, was that just because humans might be overly sensitive to something doesn't mean that the worms are. So when you're talking about the receptors that make people either run away from spicy peppers or enjoy them, the same receptors that are in that, worms don't have it. And neither do birds. So basically what we're talking about here is the whole mechanism that makes peppers spicy is not something that worms can feel. They don't know the difference between a spicy pepper and a sweet apple. They don't know what the difference is at all. And I actually did an experiment a couple years back where I ground up apples and I ground up hot peppers, and I put them on two different sides of the bin to see which one the worms went to first. Spoiler alert, they ate the hot peppers first. They actually did not touch the apples for a good long time, and yet they ate the hot peppers. Let me know what your thoughts are about that. A lot of people also say that onions and garlics have another compound that the worms could be sensitive to. And although I hear it a lot, I don't see a lot of proof. All right, let's get to feeding these guys. Okay, so we are now going to get the last of the red wigglers from Mimi's into the bin. Okay, so we're going to put in some garlic leaves, turnip leaves, and then let me back you up. We're going to add some comfrey, the last of the comfrey now. Okay, here we are. I stuffed a bunch in there, but it is not very much fast food except for the bedding, and the rest of that will just have to settle down over the next couple of weeks. That should be a pretty good feeding. I'll probably come in a couple of days and see if they haven't settled it down some. That is, if Shadow hasn't come in here and stole the comfrey. Hopefully that's okay for dogs. I have to Google that. Alright guys, well, let me know how your Thanksgiving went and how much did you feed your worms. The worms didn't get much around here with the exception of the tops of the turnips and garlic leavings. But what I wanted to say was thank you for hanging out with me and my worms, and everybody have a good day.